massive crystalline dome of the Galactic Senate sparkled under the light of 3 artificial suns. Inside, representatives from over 1,000 different species sat in carefully arranged sections, each area designed for their specific needs. The Aquarians floated in transparent water tanks, while the silicon-based rocklings sat on heated stone platforms. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting thousands of different languages into comprehensible sounds. Ambassador Veltar of the Centauri Republic stood at the central podium, his forearms gesturing gracefully as he spoke about mining rights in the outer spiral. His voice was smooth and diplomatic, the kind that had negotiated peace treaties for 3 centuries. The topic was boring but necessary. Disputes over asteroid mining had been escalating for months. The Centauri position remains clear, Veltar continued, his silver skin shimmering. Any mining operations in Sector 7 must follow established protocols, ... His words were cut short by a sound that had never been heard in the Senate before, the screech of metal being torn apart. The massive neutronium doors, each weighing several tons and supposedly indestructible, suddenly exploded inward. Chunks of the strongest metal in the galaxy flew across the chamber like deadly projectiles. Smoke and sparks filled the air. Emergency lights flashed red as security systems activated. Through the chaos, 3 figures emerged from the destroyed entrance, walking calmly through the debris as if they owned the place. The first figure was clearly the leader. Captain Kim Day stood just under 6 feet tall, which made him average by human standards, but small compared to most galactic species. His black tactical suit was torn in several places, showing glimpses of armor underneath. Dark stains covered the fabric. Some looked like blood, others like substances that probably came from alien creatures. His face was calm, almost bored, as if walking through exploding doors was something he did every Tuesday. Behind him walked Lieutenant Park So-min, a woman whose slight build fooled no one who looked closely at her eyes. Those eyes had seen things that would give most beings nightmares. Her uniform was in better condition than her captain's, but she carried herself like a loaded weapon ready to fire. Her hand rested casually near the strange device on her belt. The third human was Sergeant Lee Jun, built like a mountain and scarred like a battlefield. He carried a heavy metal container that seemed to weigh nothing in his massive hands. His expression suggested he was enjoying himself, which somehow made him more terrifying than if he had looked angry. The chamber fell silent. 3,000 alien representatives stared at these newcomers with expressions ranging from shock to terror. Most species in the galaxy were either naturally peaceful or had evolved beyond physical violence. The sight of beings who clearly lived by different rules was deeply unsettling. Captain Day walked to the center of the chamber, his boots clicking on the polished floor. Each step echoed in the sudden silence. He looked around at the assembled representatives with the confidence of someone who had faced worse things than political assemblies. "Honored delegates," he said, his voice carrying clearly without any amplification. Human vocal cords were apparently more powerful than most species realized. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. Your doors were locked." He set the metal container down with a heavy thud that made several nearby representatives jump. The container was clearly designed to hold something important or dangerous. Its surface was marked with symbols that most beings didn't recognize but somehow understood meant warning. "I present Emperor Thaxmer the Destroyer," Day announced as casually as if he were introducing a dinner guest. The container opened with a sharp hiss of escaping gases. Inside, packed in some kind of preservation material, was a head. Not just any head, the head of the most feared being in the known galaxy. Emperor Thaxmer's dead eyes stared sightlessly at the dome ceiling, his massive jaws frozen in what might have been surprise. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps and shrieks erupted from all sections of the assembly. Senator Quindell of the Hegemony, a dignified being who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, simply fainted and toppled from his floating platform. The Andromedan representatives' tentacles turned pale blue with shock, a color that indicated complete system failure in their species. Several smaller species began making high-pitched noises that their translators couldn't convert. The rocklings, normally silent, began grinding against each other in distress. Even the ancient watchers, being so old, they remembered the formation of the galaxy, shifted uncomfortably in their energy fields. The human species formally requests membership in the Galactic Federation. Day continued in the same calm tone, completely ignoring the chaos around him. We have completed our impossible task. Chancellor Morden, a towering insectoid being whose species had ruled the Senate for millennia, clicked his mandibles nervously. His compound eyes, usually so intimidating to other species, seemed small and uncertain as they stared at the human captain. Captain, the Chancellor's voice cracked slightly. This is unprecedented. The Emperor was considered unkillable. We must convene the Emergency Council immediately. Lieutenant Soman stepped forward with fluid grace, her movement suggesting she could cross the chamber and reach the Chancellor before anyone could react. With respect, Chancellor, we have 17 more worlds to liberate from his former empire. We would appreciate a prompt decision on our membership application. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. 3 months before the dramatic scene at the Galactic Senate, the Federation Council chamber looked very different. The same crystalline dome sparkled overhead, but the atmosphere was one of curiosity rather than shock. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered for what they considered a routine ceremony, welcoming a new species into their ranks. The humans stood in the center of the chamber like tiny figures surrounded by giants. Captain Kim Day looked impossibly young compared to the ancient beings around him. Most council members had lived for thousands of years, some for tens of thousands. They had seen civilizations rise and fall, watched stars be born and die. To them, humans were like children who had just learned to walk. Councillor Zephron rose from her crystal platform, her body catching and splitting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. She was beautiful in the way that living gemstones could be beautiful, but her voice carried the weight of eons. Welcome, humans of Earth. You have achieved faster than light travel and made peaceful contact with our scouts. This is no small accomplishment. Captain Day bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that seemed quaint to beings who communicated through energy fields and quantum fluctuations. Thank you, Counselor. We are honored to be here. However, Zephyrin continued, her form shifting colors as she spoke. Membership in the Galactic Federation requires more than technological achievement. Every species must complete what we call an impossible task. It is our oldest tradition, dating back 40,000 years. The chamber hummed with agreement from hundreds of different species. This was indeed tradition, sacred and unbreakable. No species had ever been granted membership without completing their task. Councillor Velinari, whose species resembled floating jellyfish made of pure energy, drifted closer to the humans. The impossible task proves that a species possesses not just intelligence, but wisdom, courage, and determination. It shows they can contribute something unique to our Federation. Council Leader Thalmer shifted his massive bulk, his stone-like skin scraping against his chair. He was enormous even by galactic standards, standing nearly 20 feet tall when upright. His species had been among the first to join the Federation, back when the galaxy was young and wild. Let me give you examples, Thalma rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. The Altarians, masters of stellar engineering, moved an entire star to save a dying world. The Vegan Collective, brilliant mathematicians, solved the paradox of infinite recursion, unlocking new realms of space-time. The Aquarian Empire created the first stable wormhole network. Other counselors began sharing their own species' achievements. The Crystalians had grown a living planet. The Void Dancers had mapped the spaces between dimensions. The Silicon Collective had built a computer the size of a moon that could predict the future. Most species, Ephron explained, choose tasks that match their greatest strengths. Archaeological expeditions to recover lost knowledge. Diplomatic missions to end ancient wars. Scientific research that advances our understanding of the universe. Captain Day listened to all of this with growing interest. Behind him, Lieutenant Park So-min took detailed notes on a device that looked primitive compared to the advanced technology around them. Sergeant Lee Jun simply stood at attention, his expression unreadable. The three humans had spent weeks aboard their ship discussing this moment. They had studied every previous impossible task, analyzed the patterns, and considered their options. Earth's greatest minds had debated what would best represent humanity to the galaxy. "What will humanity attempt?" Thalmer asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. His movement caused his chair to creak ominously under his weight. "Captain." Day looked at his teammates. So-min gave him the slightest nod. Chen's expression didn't change, but Day could see the readiness in his posture. They had all agreed on this course of action, even knowing how it would sound to these ancient, peaceful beings. "We will kill Emperor Thaxmer," Day said simply, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The chamber, which had been filled with gentle humming and the soft sounds of various species communicating, suddenly erupted into chaos. Species that had remained silent and dignified for centuries began chattering frantically in their native languages. Translation devices overloaded, trying to keep up with the sudden flood of exclamations, questions, and protests. Thalmer's compound eyes widened to twice their normal size, something that hadn't happened in over 1,000 years. Counselor Zephron's crystalline form flickered rapidly between different colors, a sign of extreme agitation in her species. "Impossible," whispered Counselor Velinari, her energy form dimming with shock. "Thaxmer commands over 1,000,000 warships. His empire spans 40 star systems. He has personally destroyed entire species for his own amusement. His fortress worlds are considered impregnable. No force in the galaxy has ever successfully challenged him." The name Thaxmer brought fear even to this chamber of the galaxy's most powerful beings. He was not just a conqueror, but a monster, a being who delighted in causing suffering on an unimaginable scale. His empire existed on the edge of known space, too powerful to defeat, too dangerous to ignore. Lieutenant So-min stepped forward, her slight build making her look even smaller among these giants. But when she smiled, something cold and predatory flickered in her eyes. "That's exactly why it's called an impossible task, isn't it, Counselor?" The Council voted 847 to 23 to approve the mission, absolutely certain they would never see the humans again. The fortress world of Kethfer had once been beautiful. Ancient records showed green forests and blue oceans covering its surface. Now it burned under a blood-red sky, the atmosphere poisoned by centuries of industrial warfare. The planet served as Emperor Thaxmer's main military base, a world covered in weapon factories and training grounds where millions of soldiers learned the art of conquest. "Captain." Kim Day stood on the bridge of the Soul's Pride, watching the burning world through the main view screen. His ship hung in space above the planet like a small predator watching a wounded giant. For 3 months, he and his team had been hunting the most dangerous being in the galaxy, and now they were close to their final target. The tactical display showed the retreating enemy forces clearly. Red dots representing Thaxmer ships fled toward the edge of the system like insects running from light. What had once been the most feared military force in known space was now scattered and broken, running from just 3 humans in a single ship. "Intelligence reports confirm it," Lieutenant Park So-min announced from her station. Her fingers moved quickly across the holographic controls, pulling up intercepted communications and spy satellite data. "Emperor Thaxmer is moving to the Nexus station. He's taking 12 of his remaining dreadnoughts as escort ships." She paused, her expression growing darker. "Captain, that station. It's not just a military base." Sergeant Lee Jun looked up from his work area, where he had been carefully preparing explosive devices. His hands were steady, despite working with materials that could level a city block. "That's where he keeps his torture chambers, isn't it? The intelligence reports mentioned millions of prisoners." Day nodded grimly, his jaw tightening. When they had first started this mission, it had been about proving humanity worthy of Federation membership. The impossible task was supposed to be a challenge, a test of their species' capabilities. But as they learned more about Emperor Thaxmer and his empire, everything had changed. Thaxmer wasn't just a conqueror who took over planets for resources or territory. He was something far worse, a creature who enjoyed causing pain and suffering. His empire existed not for any logical purpose, but because he loved to hear entire civilizations scream. He kept billions of beings as slaves, not because he needed their labor, but because their misery entertained him. The Nexus Station was his personal playground, a massive space structure where he conducted experiments on captured species. The intelligence reports had been difficult to read, entire families torn apart for his amusement, children used as test subjects for new weapons, entire species driven to extinction just to see how they would react. "Show me the technical specifications of their ship," they ordered. The Soul's Pride had been completely rebuilt using human military technology. The Federation Council had been curious about human weapons, expecting to see advanced energy weapons, or exotic matter manipulators like other species used. Instead, they found something that confused and disturbed them. Humans still used kinetic weapons, guns that fired physical projectiles at high speed. They used chemical explosives instead of plasma charges. Their ships carried nuclear warheads, weapons so primitive that most galactic species had abandoned them thousands of years ago. Yet somehow, these ancient weapons proved devastatingly effective against modern defenses. The reason was simple, but terrifying. Other species had evolved beyond physical violence, developing weapons that were clean and efficient. Human weapons were designed by a species that understood violence on a fundamental level. They were brutal, unpredictable, and psychologically devastating. "The station orbits a dying star," Solman reported, pulling up stellar charts of the target system. "The radiation levels are extreme. Most ships can't get close without heavy shielding." "That's why he chose it," Day mused, studying the tactical situation. "He expects us to attack the station directly with our ship. Every species in the galaxy thinks in terms of fleet battles and siege warfare. Bring enough firepower, break through the defenses, fight your way to the target. But we're not every species," Suman finished with a cold smile. She understood her captain's thinking. Humans had been successful predators on Earth, not because they were the biggest or strongest, but because they thought differently than their prey. Lee Jun looked at the star charts with professional interest. "The radiation will mask our approach if we use the small infiltration pods." "How many escape pods does that station have?" Day checked the technical specifications. Not enough. The plan that formed was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. While other species would bring fleets and try to overwhelm the station's defenses, the humans would do what they did best: adapt and hunt. Within 6 hours, 3 humans in advanced stealth suits had launched from the Soul's Pride in tiny, nearly invisible pods. They used the dying star's radiation as cover, approaching the station from the direction no rational being would expect an attack. The radiation that would kill most species in minutes was just another obstacle to overcome, as their pods drifted silently toward the most secure facility in the Thaxmer Empire. The galaxy was about to learn something important about humanity. Earth had produced the most successful predators in known space, not through size or strength, but through intelligence, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to give up. Emperor Thaxmer, who had terrorized civilizations for centuries, was about to discover what it felt like to be prey. The throne room of the Nexus Station was a monument to cruelty and conquest. Emperor Thaxmer had designed it to intimidate visitors and remind them of his power. The chamber stretched nearly 100 feet in every direction, with walls made of polished black metal that reflected the hellish red light streaming through massive windows. Outside those windows, a dying star burned its last breaths, casting everything in the color of blood. But the most horrifying feature of the room was not its size or the ominous lighting. Around the walls, mounted on golden spikes, were the heads of every species leader Thaxmer had personally killed. Hundreds of them, each preserved in a special chemical that kept their final expressions of terror frozen forever. Kings, queens, presidents, and emperors from across the galaxy stared down with dead eyes at the creature who had ended their civilizations. At the center of this house of horrors sat the throne itself, carved from the crystallized bones of an entire world's population. Upon it sat Emperor Thaxmer, a being that had grown far beyond his original species through centuries of biological modifications and cybernetic enhancements. Thaxmer stood 12 feet tall, his natural exoskeleton reinforced with advanced armor plating. Weapon systems were built directly into his body. Plasma cannons emerged from his shoulders, energy blades extended from his forearms, and his claws had been replaced with monomolecular cutting edges that could slice through any known material. Neural interfaces glowed along his skull, connecting his brain to the station's computer systems and giving him control over every weapon in defense. He was a living war machine, designed for one purpose: to kill anything that stood in his way. So Thaxmer's voice rumbled like grinding stone, each word carefully pronounced to maximize its intimidating effect. The little mammals have come to die personally. How refreshing. Most species send fleets or armies. You send 3 individuals. He laughed, a sound like glass breaking in a windstorm. I will enjoy making your deaths slow and educational. Captain Kimday stepped into the chamber alone, his boots clicking on the polished floor. He looked impossibly small in the vast space, just a single human facing the most feared being in the galaxy. His uniform was torn and dirty from the infiltration, and he carried only a simple sidearm at his hip. No advanced weapons, no exotic technology, no energy shields or power armor behind him. The sound of explosions echoed through the station as Lieutenant Somin and Sergeant Jun continued their work. For the past hour, they had been systematically destroying every critical system they could find: power generators, life support, communications, and defensive weapons. The station shuddered with each detonation, but Thaxmer seemed unconcerned. He was confident that nothing could threaten him personally. Your empire ends today, Day said simply, his voice calm and steady. Thaxmer leaned forward on his throne, his compound eyes focusing on the human with predatory interest. Ends, little mammal. I have conquered 300 worlds. I have personally killed the champions of 1,000 species. I have eaten the beating hearts of beings far more impressive than you. What makes you think one small human can accomplish what entire galactic fleets have failed to do? Instead of answering with words, Day moved. He didn't move with the fluid, dance-like grace of the Altarians, who had turned combat into an art form. He didn't move with the calculated, mechanical precision of the android collective, who fought with mathematical perfection. Instead, he moved with something far more dangerous: the raw, relentless aggression of a species that had fought its way to the top of Earth's food chain through millions of years of evolution. Thaxmer's plasma cannon fired, the energy beam hot enough to melt steel. But Day was no longer where the Emperor had aimed. He rolled behind one of the massive pillars supporting the chamber, the superheated air singing his hair as the beam passed inches from his head. The Emperor roared in frustration and charged forward, his 12-foot frame moving with surprising speed. His claws, each the size of a sword and sharp enough to cut molecular bonds, gouged deep furrows in the metal floor where Day had been standing just moments before. "You cannot win, little mammal," Thaxmer bellowed, swinging his massive arms in wide arcs designed to cut his opponent in half. "I am immortal. I am invincible. I am the destroyer of worlds." But Day was already gone, rolling under the Emperor's guard and coming up behind him. Thaxmer spun around with inhuman speed, but the human was ready. A small cylindrical object rolled across the floor between them, coming to rest at the Emperor's feet. Thaxmer looked down at the primitive device with confusion. After centuries of fighting advanced species with energy weapons and exotic matter manipulators, he had forgotten about simple chemical explosives. Li Chen's parting gift detonated with a flash that temporarily blinded even the Emperor's enhanced vision. The explosion wasn't enough to seriously damage Thaxmer's armored body, but it staggered him, disrupted his systems, and gave Day the opening he needed in the explosion's aftermath. As Thaxmer stumbled and tried to regain his balance, Day struck, not with advanced technology or exotic weapons, but with a simple combat knife and something that no amount of technology could replicate: the absolute determination of a human who refused to lose. The blade found the one gap in the Emperor's armor, the joint where his helmet connected to his neck. It was a tiny weakness, barely visible, but Day had been watching and waiting for his chance. Emperor Thaxmer's head hit the floor with a wet thud, his compound eyes still wide with disbelief. "This is Captain Kim Day to all Thaxmer forces," he broadcast on all frequencies, using the station's communication system. "Your Emperor is dead. Surrender now, or join him." The surrender came within the hour. The Galactic Senate chamber had never been so quiet. Even the usual background hum of translation devices and life support systems seemed muted, as if the technology itself was holding its breath. 3,000 representatives from across the galaxy sat in absolute silence, staring at the severed head of Emperor Thaxmer that still lay on the polished floor like a grotesque centerpiece. Captain Kim Day stood calmly in the center of the chamber, his torn uniform and battle scars telling the story of what he and his team had accomplished. Behind him, Lieutenant Park Soo-min and Sergeant Lee Jun waited at attention, their expressions professional, despite having just completed the most impossible military operation in galactic history. Chancellor Morden, the massive insectoid leader of the Federation, clicked his mandibles nervously as he tried to process what he had just heard. His compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, focused on the human captain with something approaching disbelief. 17 worlds liberated, the Chancellor repeated slowly, as if saying the words would help him understand their meaning. 400 enemy ships captured or destroyed. 2 million slaves freed from prison camps and torture facilities. The numbers were staggering. In 3 months, 3 humans had accomplished what entire galactic fleets had failed to do in centuries. They had not just killed the most feared tyrant in known space, they had completely dismantled his empire. Lieutenant Soo-min stepped forward, pulling out a small datapad that looked primitive compared to the advanced technology surrounding them. Yet the information it contained had reshaped the political landscape of the galaxy. "We have also identified and eliminated Thaxmer's entire command structure," she reported in a matter-of-fact tone. "His top generals, regional governors, and military advisors have all been captured or killed. The remaining forces are scattered and leaderless. We estimate complete pacification of all former Empire territories within 6 standard months." Counselor Zephyron, her crystalline form flickering between different colors as she processed this information, leaned forward from her platform. "Complete pacification," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of millennia. "You speak of conquering an empire that terrorized half the galaxy as if it were routine maintenance." Sergeant Lee Jun, the demolitions expert whose explosives had opened the way to Thaxmer's throne room, simply shrugged his massive shoulders. The gesture was so casually human that it somehow made his next words even more impactful. "Every species has its talents," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent chamber. "Some of you are great philosophers who can think thoughts that reshape reality. Others are master artists who create beauty that lasts for thousands of years. Still others are brilliant scientists who unlock the secrets of the universe." He paused, gesturing toward the Emperor's severed head with the same casual manner. "Someone might point out an interesting rock. Humans solve problems." The simplicity of the statement was terrifying. These beings didn't see the conquest of a galactic empire as an achievement worthy of celebration or boasting. To them, it was just another problem that needed solving, like fixing a broken machine or clearing a blocked drain. The vote for human membership in the Galactic Federation was unanimous. Not a single representative voted against it. Even species that had never agreed on anything before found themselves in perfect harmony on this decision. The alternative, having these problem solvers as enemies rather than allies, was too frightening to consider. As news of Thaxmer's death spread across the galaxy at faster than light speeds, the political landscape began shifting immediately. In the hegemony capital, military leaders held emergency sessions and quickly voted to recall their fleets from contested border regions. The Andromedan collective, normally isolationist and suspicious of other species, began drafting friendship treaties with Earth before the humans had even officially joined the Federation. Even the mysterious Void Runners, beings so advanced and secretive that most species weren't sure they actually existed, sent congratulatory messages through quantum communication channels. Everyone wanted to be friends with the species that could solve impossible problems. As the Senate session ended and representatives began filing out in small groups, whispering among themselves in dozens of different languages, Chancellor Morden approached Captain Day privately. The massive alien moved carefully, as if afraid that sudden movements might provoke some kind of violent response. "Captain," the Chancellor said, his voice unusually quiet for such a large being, "might I ask what your people's intentions are now? The galaxy has changed significantly in the past few hours." Day looked up at the stars, visible through the dome's transparent aluminum ceiling. Earth was out there somewhere, a small blue world that had produced the most effective predators the galaxy had ever seen. His expression was peaceful, almost thoughtful. "Same as always, Chancellor," he replied with a slight smile. "We're going to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, learn about the universe and our place in it, make friends with interesting people." He paused, and for the first time, Chancellor Morden truly understood why an entire galactic empire had surrendered within an hour of their leader's death. There was something in the humans' eyes, a quiet confidence that suggested challenges were just opportunities waiting to be solved. "And if anyone threatens the peace of this galaxy," Day added quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "we'll solve that problem too." The Chancellor nodded slowly, suddenly very grateful that humanity had chosen to be friends rather than enemies.